flag, boys will relive once again. Shouting the battle cry of freedom, we will relive from the hillside, all together from the plain. Shouting the battle cry of freedom, the Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitors, up with the stars, we will reel around the flag, boys will relive once again. Shouting the battle cry of freedom.
Good evening. You're probably wondering why we're at this time we're starting. Well, part of it is my own doing. I've been not sure if I was going to do a stream this week, but an event that occurred yesterday 160 years ago that is kind of like a side quest to the Overland Campaign, and I want to talk about it because it's very important, especially when you get into the state of Virginia's history. There's another issue. Okay, I get in StreamYards, I'm getting ready to start streaming, and then up here in the corner, when I keep hitting go live, I get this lovely little thing from StreamYard saying, there's excessive activity tonight on StreamYards. Please allow us 30 seconds to 1 minute to resolve these issues. So I sat here, waited the 30 seconds, tried to go live again. We're sorry, but there is unusually large activity tonight on StreamYards. Please try again in 30 seconds to a minute as we gather more resources. And then we did it again. And then we did it again. And this is on top of a very, very hectic day. So pardon me for those that are in the crowd that enjoy alcoholic beverages. Yep, I'm going to need that tonight. With that out of the way, and the wonders of StreamYards doing weird hoops and bounds tricks to myself, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Uncut History. Here we are live again on Readout Productions, where we live, explore, and preserve history, one video or live stream at a time. And we were already jumped in by the ghost of Howard's right arm, demanding the show, and then asking how 1 minute turned into 20 minutes. StreamYards. And then we had Wrangler drop $10 to say $4.20.
$10, a lot of money.
Yes, I have a special clip for that. Gotta keep the theme, the Civil War theme. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Battle of Newmarket. Now that's not to be confused with the Battle of Newmarket Heights, which Battle of Newmarket Heights is a little bit later on, right? In 1864. That's once we're in the trenches of Petersburg, if I'm not mistaken. Because there's already a campaign happening in front of Petersburg in the May of 1864. It ain't the big one. There's so much going on in the United States of America in 2024 as well as 1864. It's kind of weird. Both years, it's the country's trying to tear itself apart. But we're going to talk about the year where the country actually is tearing itself apart. I mean, war has effectively been declared for several years now. Armies are moving back and forth between the states, colliding with each other over different ideas on how to gather themselves. So, the Battle of Newmarket, how does this shape into what we've been talking about the past few weeks here? The past two streams, we've been talking about the Overland Campaign, where Ulysses S. Grant has come to the eastern theater of the American Civil War to take on Robert E. Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia. And after two of the bloodiest battles that the United States has yet seen, we're kind of at a stalemate right now in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. But understand that Grant's attacks on Lee's army is just one part of a multi-pronged plan. And look, I got notes. Yeah, I got notes to be, super high-tech notes that it's going to be a miracle if I can read my own scratch. That, I'm already struggling. And it ain't the Coors Banquet making me struggle. I just have horrible penmanship. So Grant's strategy when he comes east, when he becomes commander of all of the armies in 1864, is that he's going to put his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac, the Union Army of the Potomac, and tie down the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia and bleed it thin. And ideally bleed it thin to the point that he may be able to strike the Confederate capital of Richmond. But that is not the only army on the move. We're also going to have William Tecumseh Sherman in charge of the the military division of Mississippi, which is a conglomerate of several Union field armies. And Sherman's plan is to take this conglomerate of Union field armies from Chattanooga, Tennessee, cross into the treacherous mountains of northern Georgia and threaten Atlanta. If he can take Atlanta, he will essentially take the South's most critical rail artery in the Deep South, and will kind of have a straight line to cut through the heart of the Deep South and come right up to the rear of Robert E. Lee, who's trying to protect Richmond. But there's a few other smaller forces maneuvering around. So most of the general public know about Grant and Sherman advancing on Robert E. Lee and Joe Johnston, respectively. But there's other contingencies in this plan to work. You're going to have Nathaniel Banks, who's in charge of the Army of the Gulf for the Union, and he is going to begin making his way. Well, he was initially instructed by Mr. Halleck. Sorry, I can't speak right now. Mr. Halleck, who was the previous commander of the armies before Grant stepped in to take charge of that position. Halleck had already sent Nathaniel Banks to go on a mission to carve up the state of Louisiana. 3 different Union forces trying to meet in the middle of Louisiana, carve it all up. It becomes known as the Red River Campaign. Well, Grant hears about the strategy. There's too many resources down around the Louisiana coast to tell him not to do it. But it kind of puts it into Banks' mind, you really should be going to take Mobile, Alabama, take that big seaport. It's far more valuable than anything in the state of Louisiana. We took Vicksburg last year. Louisiana and Texas is just a matter of months before it withers up, dries off, and falls off the Confederacy. So Banks is going to attempt to appease Halleck's final instructions. He's also going to try to appease Grant's modified instructions. It doesn't go too well for him. Yeah, not good times for Banks. And then we have Benjamin Butler and his small Union army, the Army of the James, is demonstrating in front of the cities of Richmond and Petersburg, trying to pull the garrisons protecting those cities out of their defenses and deprive Robert E. Lee of reinforcements. However, Butler, my apologies, are going to get a little entangled and snared near a community known as Bermuda 100, and as Grant is starting to throw all that he got of George Gordon Meade's Army of the Potomac in the wilderness and at Spotsylvania, Butler ain't doing a whole lot down in the Bermuda 100. He's kind of stuck in his own earthworks down there. But there's one other army that's going to get on the move for the Union. And the goal of Grant, why all of this is happening, he wants simultaneous incursions into Confederate territory. No more piecemeal strikes, no one determination, not hinging things on one big battle. He is going to try to pull the Confederacy apart. They cannot send enough resources to plug all of these gaps. They may be able to stop one, if not multiple, of these incursions by the Union. They can't stop all of them. That is Grant's theory. That is Grant's strategy. And spoiler alert, it's going to take about a year, but it will be the strategy that ultimately wins the American Civil War. There's one other Union army on the move, however. As Grant is supervising Meade and the Army of the Potomac, you're going to have some call it the Department of West Virginia. Some call it the Army of West Virginia. Typically is called informally the Army of the Shenandoah Valley, though it doesn't technically get that name until the latter half of the year. This department's a mess. This department's the mess we're about to talk about today. And yeah, I'm going to need a little bit more of this because, oh boy, the Department of West Virginia in 1864 is fun times. And we got Zachariah Laurier tuning in. Thank you for tuning in tonight. I hope you're going to have a blast as we talk about the Battle of New Market, where the Field of Lost Shoes is located. More on that later. So, what you're going to have happen is Since the very start of the American Civil War, one of the Confederacy's most important land masses is the Shenandoah Valley. The reason being they call it the breadbasket of the Confederacy. Bountiful crops grow in this very fertile soil, thanks in large part to the forks of the Shenandoah River flowing their way up this valley, and then eventually they'll flow all the way up to Harper's Ferry, where it meets the Potomac River, and then the Potomac goes down to Washington, D.C. I love my geography lessons. I always will take an opportunity to hammer geography into everybody's brains. So, since the very beginning of the war, the Shenandoah Valley was highly valued by the Confederacy, and it was also a prime target of the Union because it's very close to Washington, D.C., and Union garrisons in Harper's Ferry, now West Virginia, and Union garrisons across the Potomac River in Maryland. So since the start of the war, you're going to see forces of the Union and Confederates constantly going up and down the Shenandoah Valley. This valley is absolutely wrecked because of the American Civil War. And a lot of scholars and a lot of history buffs always say that the Shenandoah Valley is a great microcosm of the American Civil War. Typically, the armies that fight in the valley are on much smaller scale than you hear about fighting in other Eastern theater battles because the confines of the valley, you only need so many troops to go from end to end in the valley. So it also makes it a bit easier to understand the tactical and the demographic components that make up the American Civil War. My cat is distracting me. No, you've had all day for attention. You really have, Lily. It's the evil one. See, we got free cats in the studio of Readout Productions. We got the curious one. That's the all gray one that sometimes shows up behind my corner. Then we got Wendy Weiner. She's a gray and white cat. She really likes to lay up there. So actually, you'll see her in a couple retracing histories from now. You'll see her in the corner over there. She decided to chill while I was recording yesterday. And then we got the evil one. You don't want to be near the evil one. Don't ever have an evil one in your house. I'm listening while trying to navigate a Metroid map. Oh, yeah. That'd be a little interesting. The Shenandoah Valley shows up. And thank you for enjoying. I'm glad you're enjoying the content, Zachariah. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. So, yes, it is early 1864. The Shenandoah Valley has already been greatly ravaged, most infamously by campaigns conducted by Thomas Stonewall Jackson of the Confederacy. Most people know Jackson for his outmaneuvering of larger Union forces in the valley. That's a whole video for another day. And I do hope someday to get into the Shenandoah Valley. I've never gone actually to go deep into the valley. I've gone to be on the outskirts of it, but never have got to go deep into it and really spend time, which is strange because it's really only like a 3-hour drive from Pittsburgh. It's not that far to reach by car, hypothetically speaking. Yeah. There's a problem. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation may turn that 3-hour ride into a 6-hour ride. I'm distracting myself. We got to talk about the Battle of Newmarket. So, for years, the valley's been ravaged by Union and Confederate forces vying for control over it. Thomas Stonewall Jackson became an icon of the Confederacy because he was able to consistently outmaneuver Union forces there back in 1862. There were smaller raids by the Union in 1863, but nothing as massive of Jackson's campaigns. But everything's going to change in 1864. And that is because the Department of West Virginia has its eyes set on getting the Shenandoah Valley back. Now, we know West Virginia today as being a state, just to the southwest of Pennsylvania and along the Ohio River. And it was formed because of the American Civil War. West Virginia was created because that part of Virginia did not want to secede. They were strongly against secession. They felt their voice was not heard. So they met in Wheeling, West Virginia, and voted to secede from the Confederacy and make a Union state. And that's how you get West Virginia today. But the idea of West Virginia, especially during the Civil War, is less of the state as we know today and more of this idea of Western Virginia. And that would include the Shenandoah River Valley back then. And there's a new sheriff in town for the Department of West Virginia. In March of 1864, Franz Sigel is going to make his mark. He is going to make his way as the newest commander of the Union Department of West Virginia. And we're bouncing all over there. I am sorry about that. StreamYards is lagging. And Franz Sigel is pictured off on the right in the slideshow, and you may recognize that name. We talked about him last year in our Wilson's Creek stream. He was that German officer. He was in charge of a Missouri regiment in that Battle of Wilson's Creek, and afterwards got promoted. Now, a little bit about Franz Sigel. Maybe actually be Franz Sigel. I like saying Franz Sigel. Franz Sigel, as you could tell by his name, was not born in the United States of America. He was born in present-day Germany. He was born in the 1820s. In 1843, he graduated at German Military Academy. However, he's going to resign his commission with the Prussian military, and he's actually going to join a revolutionary fighting force. A few people recall that in 1848, there was actually a massive revolution attempt, a diplomatic revolution attempt in Prussia. It did not go too well, and the Prussian military and government tramped out that revolutionary force, and Franz Sigel was one of the many Germans sent into exile, fleeing to the United States of America as such. Now, Siegel's going to set up shop in the late 1840s and 1850s in New York. He's actually going to be an officer in the New York militia, and eventually he's going to move out west for a little bit. He's going to have some businesses out west in Missouri, and that kind of puts him in a prime location when the American Civil War kicks off. And again, if you've not heard our stream about Wilson's Creek, I don't think it's no longer on the main channel. Head over to Readout Productions Replay. That is where I'm back cataloging all of these live streams. Be sure to check out that Wilson's Creek stream because it talks about the history of the state of Missouri in 1861 and a lot of overlooked aspects of the causes and early engagements of the American Civil War. Missouri was a hotbed for the American Civil War. It may be probably was one of, if not the most important state, especially when the war began, as it's kind of what started the whole mess with the Missouri Compromise. Well, it kind of expedited. Missouri expedited the American Civil War happening in the 19th century. Let's just put it that way. So what has Franz Sigel been up to? Why is he so important to this war effort? Why is he still in it after 1861, even though the Union Army were defeated at the Battle of Wilson's Creek? Well, Franz Sigel is a German. And there are a lot of German Americans in mid-19th century America, especially in the Midwest. And Franz Sigel is in the perfect location to help recruit soldiers for the Union war effort, which makes him a valuable asset for the Lincoln administration. There were whole phrases in the early days of the Civil War, like recruiting phrases like, "I'll fight for Sigel." There was a whole song written about it. Franz Sigel was an icon in 1861 for the Union cause, getting these German Americans to enlist in the Union Army, swear allegiance to the United States of America, and fight for Lincoln. Well, he is a great recruiter. Franz Sigel, great recruiter, charismatic figure when he's in the room. But when it comes to actually commanding troops in the battlefield, especially beyond the regimental level, oh boy, we got problems. Yet Franz Sigel, even though he has several years of military education in Germany, did not really translate well to fighting in the American Civil War. And I'm going to look down here because I got a whole bunch of cool stuff written about him. So he was essentially friendly with Germanic individuals in the army, and he would kind of start forming a clique with any German officers and soldiers he can find where he was in command, and he would give them orders more frequently than he would actually respect the chain of command. And sometimes he claimed that, oh no, it's the West Pointers that are forming the clique, which he's not necessarily wrong on that. These American officers educated at places like West Point, but he was also forming his own cliques in the armies. And whenever he really didn't get the promotion he felt he deserved, he would resign in frustration. This happened more than once during the American Civil War. And this once promising army commander. Well, by 1860, the end of 1863, he hasn't been doing a whole lot. He's kind of been bouncing around with a few odd jobs in the rear of the Union Army. He's not been really been entrusted with a new command since 1862. That is all going to change in 1864, because guess what 1864 is? An election year, and the Lincoln administration badly needs to make sure they get reelected. So they're going to make sure Franz Siegel's kept happy, because Franz Siegel can help them keep German Americans on the side of the Lincoln administration, a key demographic when it comes to that election later in November. So Franz Sigel is going to be given an army command. He's going to be sent to take charge of the Department of West Virginia. Now, he is entering a department he does not know much about. Yes, of course, he's new to the department, but also he's not really served in the Shenandoah Valley before. He is used to Missouri. He is used to serving in the eastern side of Virginia. Yeah, he's stepping a little bit out of his comfort zone. And I should also point out that this was done just when Ulysses S. Grant became commander of all armies. So there are some things that were made, decisions made that Grant really had no control over, and he kind of had to make the best of the existing situation. In any case, Grant hears that, okay, Franz Sigel, he's in charge of the Department of West Virginia. Lincoln administration likes him. Seems like a nice character. I'm going to entrust him with taking possession of the Shenandoah Valley. And in addition to just taking possession of the breadbasket of the Confederacy, there's also some critical rail junctions in the southern portion of the valley that if he can get possession of those, he can essentially cut off supplies being sent to the Army of North Virginia or being sent over to Joe Johnson and the Army of Tennessee trying to defend Atlanta. So you see now again why the Shenandoah Valley is so important and why Franz Sigel has a very, very important job to achieve. He's quite literally the middleman between the two big Union conglomerates. You got Sherman to the west, and you got Grant to the east. And he's going to cut those rail lines that are supplying Confederate forces, blocking Sherman and Grant's advance. How's this going to go? Well, initially, he is going to be said, you're going to get 20,000 soldiers. Sigel's like, oh, cool, this is awesome. I'm just going to mop the floor with whoever's in the Shenandoah Valley. And then Grant says, oh, well, I'm going to need some of these soldiers for the Army of the Potomac to reinforce me. Okay, Grant, I understand, but I still got about 18,000 soldiers. I'm doing pretty good. And I am going to need to take some of those other guys. I'm going to have to fill these garrisons I've just depleted in the cities. Okay, Grant, okay. I still got about 16,000 soldiers. I'm doing good. Oh, and I just told one of your subordinates, George Crook, he's going to take 6,000 men, and he is going to go to across the western mountains of the valley, and he is going to threaten those rail lines over there. And I also just told your second in command, hey, you got to get moving now. Time's ticking. I'm getting bludgeoned to death by Lee in the wilderness. You got to start moving south to cut off them supply routes. And by this point, Franz Sigel is down to 6,000 men under his direct charge to take the Shenandoah Valley. That other guy I told you that is off on the western side of the mountains, that's George Crook. George Crook is going to go out and try to raid rail lines farther to the west of the Shenandoah Valley. And Sigel was told he has to reunite with Crook in Staunton, Virginia. So what's going to happen is Sigel's kind of going, okay, Grant. All right. I'm going to take my 6,000 men, which should be freaking 20,000 men, and we're going to move up the Shenandoah Valley, and hopefully we move quick enough that we can kind of just steamroll over any Confederate resistance. After all, Grant is keeping Lee distracted, and Lee's going to be pulling all of his troops out of the valley to reinforce him, and Sigel's partially right. So Sigel has about 6,000 soldiers under his direct command. George Crook got another 6,000 men. And the plan is to unite these two groups of 6,000 soldiers in Staunton, Virginia, in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley, and then continue south and threaten Lynchburg, Virginia. That's the plan. Who's going to stop him? Well, off to the left, you're going to see his opponent today. That is John C. Breckinridge. John C. Breckinridge is kind of the man that caused the American Civil War. There's many people that could be claimed that. John Brown, I love throwing that claim around that John Brown caused the American Civil War because his raid on Harper's Ferry terrified the southern states of slave rebellions, and we went from a debate on slavery in Congress to outright panic and hysteria happening in southern states, and people arming themselves and forming militias and just waiting to pull the trigger. John C. Breckinridge has another valid claim that he started a civil war. Let me tell you why. Let's wind the clocks back a few years. Let's go back. Like Wayne's World, like Wayne's World. So John C. Breckinridge is born in 1821. He's born to an affluent family in Kentucky, the Breckinridge family, who do have ties to Virginia. And he was going to become a lawyer. That's going to be his main occupation early in life. However, he starts having a knack for politics. And he is going to join the Kentucky state legislature. And what's really interesting about him, the Breckinridge family, for the most part, were Whigs in the 1830s and 40s. If you're not familiar who the Whigs are, this was the opponent of the Democratic Party before the Republicans came to power. The Whigs, they were very much against the expansion that particularly the Southern Democrats were trying to achieve by adding more and more slave states. But the Whigs were pretty weak on how they're going to try to stop it. They try to keep cordial. They're trying to keep to this idea of, okay, small government. We don't want to break those boundaries. And it just falls apart. And the Whigs dissolved before the American Civil War. So most of the Breckinridge family were Whigs, which was just a nice way of saying, I respect the Constitution. And I may not agree with you, but I'm not going to break it. Don't break that Constitution. Oh, don't stretch that Constitution. Oh, but I don't want to break it because if I talk to you, I may break it if I talk too loud. That may be the worst description of the Whigs. I'm probably getting it wrong. Again, I'm drinking Coors Banquet right now, but the Whigs, especially weak when we get to the 1840s and 50s. Anyways, Breckinridge family were traditionally Whigs. John is a Democrat. He had a stint of studying law in cities out of the Kentucky area. He caught the Democratic bug. He got into the fever of the Jacksonians, those particular branch of the Democrats. He saw the full power the federal government could have. You also could see, the power of trying to limit what the federal government could have. All fun times there. So Breckinridge comes back to Kentucky. He is a Democrat, which puts him at odds with some of his peers at the time, but will win him a lot of admiration. And he's going to be pretty important throughout Kentucky state legislature during the 1840s, especially when the Mexican-American War happens. He's kind of this great, bridge between the Whigs and the Democrats in Kentucky. When the Mexican-American War happens, the Whigs absolutely loathed the conflict. They saw it as a power grab by the Democrats to try to expand the power of slave states, to get this whole new chunk of North America and turn it into a slave state, thus giving the Democrats more power over the United States of America. Breckinridge, though, was kind of a mediator voice. He's like, hey, I'm speaking for the Democrats, but I'm also understanding your issues, Whigs. Let's find a middle ground. So a lot of people on both sides of the aisle generally liked Breckinridge in the 1840s. So much so that he was able to get an officer's commission, which was pretty difficult in Kentucky to get an officer's commission during the Mexican-American War because, well, Kentucky has a lot of Whigs in it still. But in any case, they commission him as an officer. He'll go on to be a bit of a war hero in the Mexican-American War. And I read one particular thing. I don't know how true this is. Apparently, he gives a eulogy for fallen Kentucky soldiers. And this is going to inspire the writing of the famed poem Bivouac of the Dead. I don't know how true that is. I found it from one of the articles I was reading tonight. Interesting food for thought, though. In the 1850s, he's going to move up from state politics to federal politics. He will be in the United States Congress, and this is where he gets very important, very much involved with the slave debate, as the slave debate is going from tense to it's going nuclear hot critical. We're about to implode as a country. And he is going to argue that slavery is legal and protected by the U.S. Constitution. So he's what you would call a bit of a constitutionist, using the very writings of the Constitution to support his arguments. And eventually in 1856, his popularity is going to land him the nomination for vice president. He was only 35 years old. And of course, in 1850, James Buchanan will be elected president. He'll be president from 1856 through 1857 for 1861. Man, I'm going off the rails of a crazy train. And he's going to be the vice president of James Buchanan. He is the youngest vice president in American history to this day. John C. Breckinridge was. You're probably thinking, wait a minute. The vice president, a former vice president, was a Confederate officer. We're getting there. Well, by 1859, 1860, the whole freaking country is falling apart in the aftermath of John Brown's raid. It is very clear that the next election could very well dissolve the nation over who gets elected. Let's be fair. Whoever wins the 1860 election, nobody was going to be happy. It's one of those situations. It really doesn't matter who ends up getting it. But there's particularly one candidate who's really going to boil that water a bit too quickly. That would become President Lincoln. John C. Breckinridge did not like what was happening. He had argued to protect slavery through the U.S. Constitution. But on the other hand, he's like, I really don't want to draw arms against my countrymen. Can we not do this? This is not good for anybody. Can we settle this in Congress and not on a battlefield? And please God, not in the streets where we're bludgeoning each other to death. Well, what's going to end up happening is, without his approval, John C. Breckinridge becomes the Southern Democrat nominee for president in 1860. He had asked his friends in Kentucky, please don't nominate me. Please don't. I do not want to be the man that starts a civil war for me being elected. It turns out, I think it was Louisiana who actually submitted him as a nomination, and everybody else voted with it. And Breckinridge is like, crap. Hi, I'm the nominee for the Southern Democrats. The Northern Democrats were furious by this choice. They were assuming that Stephen Douglas would get the nomination, and the Democratic ticket split. And then, of course, you have John Bell over there trying to do the union. What was it, the Constitutional Union Party? Basically, the please don't shoot us. Please don't shoot us party for the border states like Maryland. They didn't really get too far. And we all know what happens with the 1860 election. President Lincoln is narrowly elected, and Breckinridge and Douglas and Bell, of course, lost. And the southern states start seceding one by one, anticipating that the Lincoln administration is going to abolish slavery. Well, John C. Breckinridge was interested in his road to the Civil War. You'd think it would be, okay, he lost the presidential election. He's going to secede out spite. It's not what happens. He, interestingly enough, had also gone elected to the U.S. Senate at this time while he was campaigning for president. And he's going to join the U.S. Senate in 1861, just as the Lincoln administration's taken charge. So this is crazy. I want you guys to think. John C. Breckinridge left the vice presidency and went right to the U.S. Senate just as these southern states are seceding. And you know how he's feeling there. He's a remnant of the Buchanan administration, which at this time was considered the worst presidential administration. So you could probably know how awkward this was for the man. And well, he is going to try to do something in the Senate, but he pretty much has no power in the Senate. He's one of the few Democrats that are still staying, Southern Democrats, who's still staying in the U.S. Senate. Throughout 1861, he tries to vote for things. He's always opposing the Lincoln administration. It goes nowhere. And then his native state of Kentucky, which initially was going to stay neutral, decides to join the Union. And that is what pushed Breckinridge over the edge to secession. And in late 1861, he's going to resign his post in the Senate, and he's going to become a general in the Confederate Army. So he was a little late to the game, and that's a little winding road to get here, but it's a very unique story. Breckinridge's story is really unique. I'll fast forward a bit about his time in the Confederate Army. He predominantly served in the Western Theater under the command of Braxton Bragg in the Army of Tennessee. And oh boy, it ain't good, guys. John C. Breckinridge is a politician, and he is very good at charming the public. He's very good at organizing friends in high places around him, which kind of unnerved the commander, Braxton Bragg. Breckinridge also had a tendency to be very slow to respond to Bragg's commands, be it due to miscommunication, just couriers getting lost and it just had a bad habit, be it that Breckinridge was intentionally ignoring Bragg's orders to just tick him off, because Breckinridge loathed Bragg in command. He felt that Bragg must be removed regularly, was pushing for Bragg to be removed from the Army of Tennessee. There was just bad blood between Bragg and Breckinridge. It boiled over more times than one. And by 1863, the decision was made by Jefferson Davis to pull Breckinridge out of the Western theater, get him out of there before things blow up. Spoiler alert, they blew up at the Battle of Chattanooga. You know about that from our live stream. And in 1864, Breckinridge is a little bit disgraced. At one point, there were charges put against him by Bragg. They were never proven nor disproven. So Breckinridge is coming to the Shenandoah Valley. He's put in charge of protecting it. A whole new clean slate, essentially, to start back over. So he's kind of looking for a bit of redemption. You don't really have much to do it with. You got maybe 3,000 soldiers to hold the Shenandoah Valley with. Again, most of these defenders of the valley have been pulled to the Army in Northern Virginia to give Lee as much of a numerical advantage against Grant as possible. Spoiler alert, he doesn't have a numerical advantage. So Breckinridge is basically trying to take a tissue paper to stop water. I don't see anything bad going wrong here. Well, to Breckinridge's credit, he is going to find a way to form an ad hoc army here in the Valley. I believe his command they had different names for it. Some of it was called the Department of the Valley, Department of the Trans-Allegheny Valley Division. I think it was Department of Trans-Allegheny Divisions, what his technical command was called. And he is going to pull together scraps of an army. It ain't much, but he got a few brigades of artillery and infantry and cavalry. And what's also very interesting about the Shenandoah Valley is what's located in it. The Virginia Military Institute. And of course, this is where we are going to start talking about that Field of Lost Shoes title in the description. And I appreciate you if the comment, Ghost of Howard's Right Arm. I have amazing, stupendous, multi-million-dollar special effects on this program. So, the Virginia Military Institute was established in the 1830s in Lexington, Virginia, within the Shenandoah Valley, to essentially be Virginia's answer to New York's West Point. Very similar to how you're going to have when the Federal Armory and Arsenal is put in Springfield, Massachusetts. The southern states start whining. They want their own to balance it out amongst the states. They put a second one in Harper's Ferry. I got a slew of retracing history videos to tell you why that was a bad idea to put a federal arsenal and armory in that valley. Not a good place to defend. Bad place to defend. So the Virginia Military Institute was set up and is still going on today. I should point that out. It is still an active military academy. The difference is where West Point is, of course, through the United States Army, officers of the U.S. Army. This is a state-ran institution. So this is a bit smaller scale. Its classes are a bit smaller, as a much smaller class base of students, but it has produced quite a number of military leaders. In fact, it's estimated that about 300 Confederate field officers were graduates of the Virginia Military Institute during the American Civil War. And years after, many more of America's noteworthy officers in the world wars are to come from the Virginia Military Institute. It's second only to West Point as the most historical war colleges in the United States of America. Well, when desperate times call for desperate measures, the Confederacy will pull from VMI to help protect itself. Now, this is not the first time that VMI will be called upon to help protect the valley. It happened every other time Union incursions were made up the valley. Those other times, they did not see combat. They were usually just held there in reserve, more or less, just so there was extra troops in the rear to do odd jobs, so all of the main fighting force can go forward. So the VMI cadets have been called before to be held in reserve for Confederate forces defending the Shenandoah Valley, but they have never seen combat. And it was kind of an unwritten rule amongst all of the commanders that they didn't want to put kids in battle. They weren't going to, so they're doing it because the Confederate government's like, we need everybody. So the Confederate generals will go, okay, we'll bring VMI out. Do not let them get near gunfire. So help me God, if one of them kids get hurt, I'm going to Davis himself. And anyways, so that's the situation in 1864. John C. Breckinridge is charged of the Confederate Trans-Allegheny Division. It's just the Confederate Defensive Force in the Shenandoah Valley. He doesn't have much to defend the valley with, but he's going to do his best to stop Franz Sigel coming up the Shenandoah Valley with about 6,000 Union soldiers. Sigel and the Department of West Virginia have a clear advantage over Breckinridge when it comes to new numbers. But will that lead to Union success today? And I also want to mention, I've been now saying we're going up the valley. You may be a little confused. We are technically going south. Franz Sigel's moving south, but he's technically moving up the valley. The Shenandoah River is one of them weird rivers that starts south and flows north because it's technically going downhill. It's going down the valley. It's going down the valley where it'll empty into the Potomac at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. So if you're getting confused, when I say we're going up the Shenandoah Valley, we're actually going south. If we're going down the Shenandoah Valley, we're going north. Believe me, it took me years to comprehend this. So back to our story. First, we're going to have a drink. And there's a nice, lovely map of the Shenandoah Valley going from north to south, going from down to up the Shenandoah River. We mentioned earlier, Franz Sigel's orders from Ulysses S. Grant is to take 6,000 infantry overland. He is going to go down the Valley Pike, and he is going to rendezvous with George Crook's 6,000 Union soldiers at Staunton, Virginia, which is in the upper southern end of the Shenandoah Valley. But to do that, he has to go through a couple of communities, got to go through some natural obstacles, all of which could potentially be used by Breckinridge and the Confederates to delay him and buy time. Now, by May 15th, my apologies, May 14th, the day before the battle we're going to talk about, by May 14th, 1864, Sigel's Union forces are starting to approach the community of New Market. Now, at New Market, there is a mountain gap east of this town. That mountain gap kind of gives you a shortcut from the Shenandoah Valley over to the eastern half of Virginia, which means this is a very critical supply artery for the Army of Northern Virginia to pull supplies from the Shenandoah Valley and deposit them into the Army of North Virginia, whom, just according to my calculations this time, are in earthworks around Spotsylvania Courthouse. And if you want to learn about what's happening to Lee at Spotsylvania Courthouse, you can tune in to last week's stream about that battle. Getting possession of New Market, it could be a boon for Franz Sigel. He can cut off another supply artery for Robert E. Lee. Sigel, however, is being quite sluggish. He's bickering amongst his own chain of command. Again, he has his own clique. He has his own clique going. He only has certain officers he trusts. And then he'll accuse that, no, it's the West Pointers that have the clique. It ain't me. No. So Sigel's moving a little bit sluggishly. He's not moving with full force. It's kind of more like piecemeal to spread all throughout the valley. And as such, on the night of May 14th, some of his forces are going to come to rest just north of the community of New Market, awaiting further instructions. Meanwhile, Breckinridge sees an opportunity here, and he is going to quickly move up his 3,000 Confederate soldiers, and some say it may have been up to 4,000 as well. So 4,000. I'm giving rough numbers out. He's going to rush his men down the valley. He's going to rush his men to the southern outskirts of New Market, and it is very clear to both commanders that a battle is about to ensue the next day. And indeed it does. On the morning of May 15th, 1864, Union and Confederate artillery places emplacements on either side of the community of Newmarket are going to start open firing on each other. Which means, unfortunately, for the people living in Newmarket, they wake up to cannonballs flying through their houses. Ah, what a perfect way to wake up. Oh, look, the moon's coming down very fast from the sky. Right through the window it goes. So there is an artillery duel between the opposing artillery positions on either side of the community as Breckinridge starts to deploy his main line of battle just to the southwest of Newmarket. He's going to set up on Shirley's Hill. His troops are going to start advancing down Shirley's Hill into a bit of a swell and are going to start assaulting up what is known as Manners Hill, where a portion of Sigel's Union Army have been deployed. Now, as we mentioned, Sigel's army is kind of piecemeal. And Sigel's having some trouble trying to figure out where the enemy's going to attack him, trying to figure out what he is going to do. He's trying to figure out where George Crook is because he wants to keep in parallel to George Crook coming down the valley. He doesn't want to run in front of him or run behind him. He wants to keep it a nice, even pace. He's also trying to figure out what the heck is happening on the east side of the Shenandoah Valley because I'm sure they could hear gunfire echoing from that massive assault that happened on May the 12th at Spotsylvania. Even I know we're many miles away, but I think you have some distant artillery booming still. And he is not really getting much communications from Crook. He is not getting much communications from Grant. Sigel is furious because Sigel's like, first Grant tells me I'm going to have 20,000 soldiers or do what I want in the valley. Then he starts micromanaging. He starts sending part of my army to the west side of the mountains. He starts detaching part of my army to reinforce him, Grant on the east side of the mountains. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to keep moving down the valley pike until something gives. That's kind of his attitude. Not really a good attitude to have when you're trying to take a tactical position. There is going to be oh man, my notes are horrible. I can't read my chicken scratch. There is going to be a Union brigade under command of Gustus Moore. They're sitting along what's known as the River Road, which runs right to the North Fork of the Shenandoah River, running out of Newmarket up to the North Fork of the Shenandoah River. You might even be able to see Moore's position just located just to the northwest of Newmarket. He got about 3 or 4 regiments deployed out there. They're going to kind of provide covering fire. They're trying to slow down Breckinridge's advance. Couriers are racing up to tell Sigel, hey, we got a massive Confederate force advancing from our south. You need to get down here. This is where the battle's happening. This is going to decide the fate of the valley. So Sigel is going to ride forward. But by midday, when Sigel gets on top of Morris Hill, he is just a few yards away from the front line. He's a few dozen yards away from the Confederates, who are just now in the process of starting to crest Morris Hill. Moore's forces are starting to break down. They're starting to fall back. Sigel immediately starts ordering, okay, we're going to form a new, better defensive line about a mile north of Newmarket. We're going to deploy it along Bouchong Hill. Bouchong Hill is named after a small farm that's located between Moore's Hill and Bouchong's Hill. We're going to deploy a new line on the front of that hilltop. We're going to run it. I'm going to anchor my eastern flank on the Shenandoah River. I'll anchor my western flank on Smith Creek. And you can even see that in the top corner of the map. It's a very narrow corridor, but very defendable, especially with Sigel, who, again, is a little frustrated that he's lost he still has a technical numerical advantage. I mean, 20,000 guys. That was far cooler than 6,000 guys. So he's going to plan to put his main army, his Union Army, put his flanks on either waterway. As we're going to find out, that does not fully work to plan. Breckinridge moves through Newmarket. He is actually going to scale up a house. He's going to knock on the door and ask the kind lady at the door, hello, ma'am. May I use your attic? And he's going to go up there. He's going to kind of pin himself. There's a trap door in the roof of the attic. He's going to pin himself against his old lady's chimney, put binoculars on and see what Sigel's planning in front of him. He can see this line starting to be developed. So from there, he is going to decide to continue the frontal assault. He feels he has the advantage, but he got to bring up some more support. So trailing behind are the VMI cadets. So we mentioned they're going to be in reserve supporting his army. Breckinridge is starting to deploy the full breadth of his regulars. they're going to start fanning out in a line of attack north of New Market. And now we're going to enter the major phase of the battle. This is the main battlefield, which is predominantly preserved today, that you can explore this afternoon portion of the fighting at New Market. So what's going to happen is the Confederates are starting to they're trying to form their battle line, but as they come over and down, Manners Hill, they're going to start taking some heavy artillery fire from the Union. The Union have artillery batteries strung along Bushong Hill. On the east side of the Valley Pike, they got artillery pieces. On other high ground, they're going to start pouring cannonballs and exploding shells upon Manners Hill. And it's going to make it quite difficult for the Confederates to get in position. In fact, the Confederates are running down Manners Hill, down its northern slope to get into the swell. It's actually safer to pin themselves in the Bushong farm, pin themselves to the ground in the mud. And I also I've neglected to tell you guys the weather conditions of the battle. It is pouring buckets. It's thundering and lightning during this battle. These are not great conditions to be maneuvering troops into. Your feet are getting stuck, clung into the mud, especially since you're moving over farm fields. It's going to be difficult to move the artillery. Mud is clinging to the wheels. Bad times on both sides in this battle. Now, what follows is a very, very confusing event during the Battle of New Market. You're going to notice on the eastern side, the eastern flank of the map here for the Confederates, you may notice a gentleman by the name of Stahl in blue. That is a Union cavalry commander. He's the main Union cavalry commander on the field during this battle. So you got a large variety of horseback riders, and typically how the cavalry is used during the Battle of New Market, they're being used on the very far flanks of the infantry to kind of spar and outflank the enemy and try to cut off their rear supply route. Well, we don't know why fully, but all of a sudden, Mr. Stahl and his Union cavalry is going to start making a massive frontal charge toward Confederate artillery emplacements. Now, some say Sigel commanded this. Other people say Sigel had no idea what was happening because he was on the western flank of the Union line trying to organize it to anchor to the Shenandoah River. He has no idea what's happening on the other side of the Valley Pike. And the next thing he knows, he can see from this high ground he's on hundreds of cavalrymen charging like it's 50 years earlier during the Napoleon times. And I'm sure it was a beautiful image right up until they get in range of them Confederate artillery pieces. And to make matters worse, they're not just charging into Confederate big guns, they're charging into enfilading fire from Confederate infantry that's right now deploying on the battlefield. So they're not necessarily deployed frontally since they're running into position. They're coming at an angle. So these Union cavalrymen, as they charge toward the Confederate eastern flank, they're taking artillery from the front and they're taking musketry to their right. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out what is going to happen to these cavalrymen. I wonder if we have a image. Do we have an image? No, we really don't have an image of what happened to these guys. It's probably for the best. They kind of get wiped out. Stahl's most of the Union cavalry is completely broken apart by the artillery and Confederate infantry, and the Union cavalry is going to run past the Union infantry, keep running north, and they are no longer a factor in the Battle of New Market. Who ordered this cavalry charge? We don't know. Maybe the commander looked a little bit like this.
Hi, man.
What are you doing?
I'm drinking wine and eating cheese and catching some rays, you know.
Yep, that's probably what the Stahl was doing after his failed cavalry charge. Now, with the cavalry off the field, the Union eastern flank, my apologies, is very weak. The Union eastern flank is starting to become very weak. And Sigel's going to quickly start ordering for infantry to plug this gap on the east side of the Valley Pike. He's going to send down the 54th Pennsylvania. He's also going to send in the 1st West Virginia. And I want to take particular note on the 54th Pennsylvania because being from Western Pennsylvania, I always like to shout out local history. 54th Pennsylvania are largely made out of Western and Central Pennsylvania guys, predominantly from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which we just talked about a few weeks ago. Johnstown at this point was just becoming a powerful iron City. You had the Cambria Iron Works. You also had people employed in the Pennsylvania Railroad, shifting that iron to Pittsburgh and to other cities. So this is a regiment made up of iron workers, coal miners, railroad workers, and these are some pretty tough guys that are, and people local to me. These people actually live near where I live currently. So they're going to be sent in by Sigel to plug the gap left behind by the failed cavalry charge. And them in the 1st West Virginia are going to get absolutely mauled when they charge into a stand of cedars, which are later named the Bloody Cedars, in the very center of the battlefield. I will go back and you might be able to even see. I don't think this map truly puts where the 54th were. I think it's where they started running. I think they were a little bit more dead middle where I-81 now runs, but it's in that location where you can kind of see where you see all the arrows meeting. That narrow void in the middle. Somewhere near the tall cedars, near the center of the center of the battlefield, I should say. So there's going to be some vicious fighting in these Bloody Cedars. And in fact, the 54th Pennsylvania are going to suffer over 30% casualties trying to hold the Union center. It'll be the second highest loss, I think, for at least Union regiments, if not all regiments on the battlefield that day. Had their tally somewhere here. Again, written, just chicken scratch all over the place. Horrible. What did I do tonight? Yes, 30% casualty rate amongst this regiment. Thought I wrote down the actual losses they suffered. So the Union cavalry made some weird charge that completely demolished them. Nobody's shocked. That kind of left the Union eastern flank unsupported around Smith Creek. That's going to allow the Confederate cavalry of Jones and Emmenden to kind of cross the creek, put some artillery up there, and start fire and give it enfilading fire on the Union center and their western flank. And the Bloody Cedars, the 54th from 1st West Virginia, try to hold tenaciously, but they're going to expire here shortly. That kind of sets the stage for the final phase of the fight. It appears that Sigel's men are starting to lose ground, but are still tenaciously holding on to the Bushlong Hilltop. The Bushlong Hilltop is a tough slope to take, especially when you have artillery lining its top and you got infantry on the forward crest. As we mentioned earlier, Confederate forces from Wheaton's brigade, they have to run into the valley, run into the swell to try to avoid being hit, and then kind of pin themselves down in the ground in the middle of the valley and await further instructions. Some of the regiments are going to be pushed back by Union forces, and it appears that there is a hole in the center of the Confederate line briefly. It is decided to bring the VMI cadets forward to fill that plug. And it's at that moment, Breckinridge is continually hammered to, are we putting in the VMI cadets? And Breckinridge is like, please send somebody else. We have nobody else. You have to send in the cadets if you want to plug in that gap. And it famously says next to his aide, send the boys in and may God forgive me. In total, there's about 200 cadets that make up this small fighting force. It's not a very big unit. It's very small on the battlefield. They're flying the flag of the Virginia Military Institute. They're dressed in the clothing that you would find a cadet back at school in Lexington wearing. It looks like they've come right out of classes, right onto the battlefield. The age range is typically in the late teens, early 20s. Oldest member is 25 years old. The youngest is 15 years old. And unfortunately, since this is the very first time they've ever experienced enemy fire, well, the good news is they hold discipline very well. The bad news is this is not time to show bravery. You're being pounded by Union artillery. You got to get off Morris Hill now. You got to get into that valley. Instead of running down, they decide to march in parade style, orderly manner, slow movement to keep the line together down the northern slope of Morris Hill, which means they are completely raked by Union artillery fire and they will suffer their first casualties there. But they keep cohesion, get to the bottom of the swell. They're on the Bushong farm. And then, and it's still kind of up to debate why this happens, but it appears that they get quite confident in their abilities. Like, all right, we kept together under artillery fire. they see these Union guns up here and they notice, yeah, these Union lines starting to look a little bit shaky, especially because we have the whole eastern flank of the Union line has basically been rolled up by this point. Looks like they're starting to fall back to a new defensive position. Maybe this is the reason that convinces the cadets to charge. And they are going to charge over 200 yards from the Bushong farm up Bushong Hill over a muddy field, hence the name Field of Lost Shoes. As after this charge was made, the people that were kind of picking up the dead from the battlefield recall just numerous shoes being clung to the dirt between the farmhouse and where the Union artillery pieces were. The VMI cadets charge. Other forces of Wheaton's brigade are going to follow. Breckinridge's army is advancing on all fronts at this point. When the cadets get to the top of the hill, there's going to be some melee over the Union artillery pieces, but they are actually going to claim they're going to capture one of the Union guns, which is at this time one of the ultimate prizes for an infantryman. If it wasn't a battle flag, then the ultimate prize for infantry was if you can take an enemy artillery piece. That was a pretty high honor to do. It wasn't easy to do either, but in this case, we have VMI cadets doing it in their first battle. At this rate, Sigel realizes the battle's been lost. All of his flanks have been rolled up. He is going to order for a withdrawal. Now, to cover his withdrawal, a gentleman by the name of Captain DuPont, yes, tied with these, he is a relative of the famed DuPont family that owned the DuPont gunpowder mills along the Delaware River, and later would be the DuPont Chemical Company. Captain DuPont is going to deploy his artillery guns on new hilltops north of this fighting, and he's going to perform a delay in action. I think what he did was, I don't know for certain, but the protocol when you were firing the artillery pieces in retreat was fire by recoil. So what you would end up doing was you'd fire the gun, let it recoil back, fire again, just let it push itself back, essentially. So I think that's what he's doing. He's firing by recoil for a mile or so north of New Market to allow Sigel and the Union Army enough time to make a retreat out of this portion of the Shenandoah Valley. And that brings an end to the Battle of New Market. It is a Confederate victory, even though the Confederates were they were outnumbered, about 3,000 Confederate forces against 6,000 Union soldiers. John C. Breckinridge, at least on this day, has brought some redemption to his name after the controversy endured in the Western Theater, fighting with Braxton Bragg. When I mean fighting, I don't mean fighting Union forces. I mean bickering with his commanding officer, Braxton Bragg. Breckinridge and the department, the Trans-Allegheny Department, they have possession of the battlefield. As it comes to the VMI cadets, 10 VMI cadets were killed in their involvement in the Battle of New Market. About 40 more were wounded. However, they could not have been more happier about what they achieved that day. And the events in New Market, while the battle itself is a small battle, comparatively small to other battles we talk about like Gettysburg, Spotsylvania, Wilderness, Chancellorsville, this is going to be the defining moment for the Virginia Military Institute. And we'll talk a bit more about how they honor this later on. But let's talk about the tactical impact. Oh, man, I didn't even show the images. So here's an image of the charge up through the Bushong farm. I got so excited in the story, guys. I apologize. Forgot to show you the nice illustrations. And again, this is showing you the thunderstorm that essentially it's set over the battlefield and why the shoes of the cadets were left behind on the Bushong farm. And this is an image today. You can see the Bushong farm on the right-hand side of this image. And then kind of you're looking to the north. You're looking toward the Field of Lost Shoes that they had to traverse. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of New Market, John C. Breckinridge has succeeded in driving the Union threat, at least for the time being, out of the Shenandoah Valley. Franz Sigel is going to fall back. He's going to fall down the valley. Remember, we're going north. So in Shenandoah Valley terms, that means we're going down with the river. So we're going down out of the valley. And they're going to fall the whole way back to Harper's Ferry eventually. They'll fall back there. And at that point, Grant and Lincoln, when they get word of his setback, they've had enough of Franz Sigel. Franz Sigel is going to be replaced by David Hunter. And next month, in June of 1864, David Hunter is going to lead another offensive by the Union up the Shenandoah Valley, going south into the valley. This one will get past New Market with no real resistance. By this point, John C. Breckinridge had been pulled with some of his troops out of the valley to reinforce Robert E. Lee. We'll talk about that in a few weeks' time. Good things don't necessarily happen to Breckinridge in a few weeks' time. Hunter is going to roll up the valley. He's going to get to Lexington, Virginia, which is the home of the Virginia Military Institute. And by this point, the word of the story of the cadets' attack has gotten out on both sides of the battlefield, that they, one hand, the Confederates were proud that, hey, our young boys, our future officers took to the field in their first battle and took a cannon. The Union basically went, the Confederates are throwing young boys to get at us, and they're letting these young men get slaughtered on the battlefield. How dare they? And when they get to the Virginia Military Institute, the order is given to set fire and destroy some of the buildings. Interesting detail, Captain DuPont was with Hunter's army, and DuPont had witnessed, the charge of the VMI cadets firsthand. He was none too enthused by the order, begrudgingly admitted, wrecked some of the buildings to satisfy the Union high command, and DuPont, Hunter continued their offensive. Their goal again was to try to take Lynchburg at the very upper end of the valley. However, they were stopped just outside of Lynchburg and forced to fall back once again back down the valley. In the long run, after these setbacks, Sigel failing to capture the valley at the Battle of New Market, and later Hunter's failures, what is going to happen is a new commander is going to be sent to the Shenandoah Valley. And as Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Potomac, commanded by George Meade, settle into siege warfare around Petersburg in the summer of 1863, both armies are looking to try to distract one another from Petersburg. Lee is going to send Confederate forces up the Shenandoah Valley. They're going to get so far north. They're going to cross. Into Maryland. They're going to get to the outskirts of Washington, D.C. I kid you not. There was a Civil War battle that occurred in Washington, D.C. Never gets talked about. Abraham Lincoln was there to observe the battle. So we might get to talk about that later this summer. So that was July of 1864. But ultimately, the heavy artillery units that were protecting Washington, D.C. are going to drive the Confederates back into the valley. And Grant's basically like, all right, I've had enough of the Shenandoah Valley. This thing is becoming way too much of a nuisance. I probably should have not divided up Sigel's force, but Sigel's gone anyways. I'm going to put my favorite man in charge of the Shenandoah Valley. I'm putting Phil Sheridan in charge. And you know how we all feel here at Redoubt Productions about Phil Sheridan. We had that wonderful vote last week on Spotsylvania Courthouse. Yeah. To be fair to Sheridan, he will have great success in the Shenandoah Valley in the fall of 1864. And by the end of the year, the Shenandoah Valley, for the most part, will be under Union control. And that is going to greatly cripple the war effort of the Confederacy, ultimately leading to their surrender in 1865. So, in the short run, Battle of New Market, Confederate victory. We got this mythological story of Virginia Military Institute cadets charging Union guns to help win the day. In the long run, however, Sigel is going to be replaced by Hunter and later be replaced by Sheridan. And eventually Grant will realize the errors he has made with handling the valley and take it more seriously in future campaigns, thus spelling doom for the Confederacy. Now, the charge of the VMI cadets in New Market, as I mentioned, has gained mythologized status, especially in Virginia, especially because of the Virginia Military Institute. And beginning as early as 1866, the Virginia Military Institute will hold a New Market Day every day in May, every year, once a year in May. I'm presuming it's on May 15th, and that's when the battle occurred. It had been yesterday, where all the cadets will gather in the courtyard of the Virginia Military Institute, and they will read out the names of the cadets that were killed. They will read the roll of honor and remember their sacrifice, and basically how this is the standard for all graduates coming out of the Virginia Military Institute going forward. And it is taken on a life of its own, the field of lost shoes. So much so that the Virginia Military Institute eventually bought the Bushong farm to preserve it. And that is why we are able to see that battlefield today. Because unfortunately, especially the Newmarket area, you have I-81 that replaced. It is I-81, right? Oh God, please tell me. I've always heard about Shenandoah. Yeah, please tell me that's okay. I-81. Okay, I'm good. Okay, the Interstate 81 is what replaced the Valley Pike. It's a 4-lane interstate that goes right up the valley, which means it goes right through the heart of the Newmarket battlefield. So the Newmarket battlefield has been a very endangered battlefield for years, but like any battlefield, there's, of course, preservation teams trying to preserve it. We're going to talk a little bit about them in a moment. But the Virginia Military Institute were one of the first big players in preserving this battlefield due to its importance to its school's history. An interesting detail, when we get to the 20th century, Captain DuPont becomes a member of the United States government, and he's going to use his new power to influence restoration of the buildings he begrudgingly destroyed during the American Civil War. So there's a tie to that as well. And to the present day, if you become a member of the Virginia Military Institute, if you become a cadet, you're known as rats, essentially. You're known as rats. The first years are just called rats. And the rats are forced to run the Bushong farm as part of an induction ceremony. So all new cadets are required to run across the field of lost shoes as part of their initiation into the Virginia Military Institute. So this story has taken on a life of its own for the state of Virginia and its military institute. And I want to pause to mention that Fu Man Blue has popped in. Apologize, I didn't get to talk about this earlier, but thank you for the donation. Thank you very much, sir. And yes, Ghost of Howard's right arm. Thank you. Thank you for always being my guided light on these streams. 81. Okay. I was going a little crazy there. I was like, oh no, that'd be pretty bad if I messed that up. And we're going to kind of wind down the story. I want to end by telling the story of a monument. So off to the left is what was known as the Reconciliation Monument, which was put in Arlington Cemetery and was essentially considered a memorial to Confederate soldiers that were killed during the American Civil War, and kind of bring this monument as a "we're sorry" letter to the U.S. Congress for seceding. We won't do it again type deal. The man who created it, his name is Ezekiel Moses. He's photographed up on the right. Now, this is him as an older man, because when he was in about 20 years old, he was one of them VMI cadets that charged across the field of lost shoes. Ezekiel Moses will go on to become a sculptor. His artwork is all across the state of Virginia today, including numerous monuments relating to the American Civil War, like this Reconciliation Monument. Fast forward to 2023, and that Reconciliation Monument has been ordered to be removed from Arlington Cemetery. So if you remember a few months back, I think we even talked about on the stream about the a big Confederate monument in Arlington Cemetery being forced to be removed. There's new federal rules in that there can be no Confederate monumentation on any federal property. This is a result of it, or something like that. They worded it. I don't know how it's really worded. So this was dismantled at the end of last year. And there was a lot of debate on what will become with the monument. The good-ish news is it seems that the Virginia Military Institute are going to take stewardship of this monument, and it is going to be repurposed as a monument either at VMI itself or at the Newmarket battlefield. Now, I've heard dispute on where this is going to end up going. So I can't answer that for certain. Maybe somebody in the chat or the comment section to tell us for certain. In the future, can tell us for certain. Have they has this monument been restored at VMI or the Newmarket battlefield? I've heard talks about a monument that was torn down in the past couple of years to the Confederacy being repurposed on the Newmarket battlefield as a general Virginia state monument to honor the Virginia soldiers. There's a good many of the Confederate forces that fought there were, well, what a shocker, were Virginians. So there are efforts being made to I know there's efforts being made to move a Confederate monument and dismantled and relocated to the Newmarket battlefield. I don't know if it is the Reconciliation Monument that Ezekiel Moses designed, but in any case, there's a direct tie to a cadet that fought at Newmarket to this monument that has gotten some publicity due to reasons in the past few years. All right. Now, if you do want to go and explore and visit Newmarket, which of course I highly encourage you if you ever get the chance, and hopefully someday we get to go see it here on Redoubt Productions. The Shenandoah Valley battlefields, they do a wonderful job in preservation efforts. I want to make sure I'm saying, yeah, Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation. They have been on a mission from God, essentially, to try to preserve all of these battlefields. I mean, what I mean is not in a religious sense, but in the sense that these folks are highly committed to preserving not just the battlefield of Newmarket, but all of the battlefields in the Shenandoah Valley, because this is a microcosm of explaining the American Civil War. The Shenandoah Valley is a perfect way to explain the American Civil War to somebody who's not used to the terminology and the lingo of these much larger armies when we're talking about battles like Wilderness and Spotsylvania. But they've done a great job preserving Newmarket. And you can also visit the Civil War Museum of Virginia. It is located right on the Newmarket battlefield, adjacent to where the famed charge across the fields of Lost Shoes occurred. Let me get the Virginia Museum of the Civil War. Oh, sorry, I got it backwards. Hey, we're over the hour mark. I get a little weird over the hour mark. And I believe, yes, the Virginia Museum of the Civil War, it's actually operated by VMI itself. Again, VMI do own the property where the Field of Lost Shoes charge occurred. And then I believe the Shenandoah Battlefields Preservation, they have purchased property around it, like the 54th Pennsylvania, who also have a monument at Newmarket. Let's go back. I forgot to show you their monument. There it is, the monument to the 54th Pennsylvania, where the Bloody Cedars action occurred in the center of the two sides' lines. So property is preserved by multiple entities: the Virginia Military Institute, sorry about Shenandoah, guys. I want to make sure I'm getting the name right, because lately I've just been kind of slurring all the preservation associations into one. I just end up calling it association. Virginia Military Institute, Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, the National Park Service, and the American Battlefield Trust have all been working together to preserve lands, not just at Newmarket, but in the surrounding area, about all these battles that occurred in the valley during the American Civil War. So links in the description below if you want to explore more about the Shenandoah Valley, if you want to learn more about the Virginia Museum of the Civil War, learn how you can help preserve this history, the shared past. All right, and I'm gonna bring up some final comments tonight. I've lost count of the number of times I've driven through the valley, usually at night at 80 miles per hour. I know 81 pretty well. What's the speed limit? Ghost of Howard's right arm. Dismantled and moved is better than being destroyed by activists. I hate seeing it happen. Yes, it's a really good thing that some of these monuments, the worst thing to do is just throw something away and just trash it. That's just the worst thing in the world. It's just so useless. It's like, well, can we produce in something new, something creative, something that's impactful? We got a very wasteful culture. We'll build a structure called modern, then 20 years later, tear it down and build a brand new structure. We don't like adapting to older things to try to find how we can use it in the new world. So yeah, it's cool that some of these monuments are able to get a new lease on life, be used in maybe a better setting, a better environment. Well, they're better appreciated. They're just in the right location now. So we'll see what happens in the future here with those preservation efforts in Newmarket. I'm hoping one day I can get down to Newmarket. Again, it's not too far from me. And it's a relatively small battle I wouldn't say it's easy to tackle, because no historical event's easy to tackle, but it's much easier. It's much better to comprehend than like a Gettysburg. You kind of see it all in one line of sight. You can see all the major events happening. And I'm going to double check on something. I want to see if that video's floating around. Not that video. Okay, well, where's his video? Oh, here we are. So if you do want to see some footage of the battlefield in person, I'm going to drop the link to History Savior 1941's video that he released a little while back, about the time he made a brief stop at the New Market battlefield, and he'll talk more about the story of the Field of Lost Shoes. So be sure to go support History Savior 1941. We've had him on the live stream before. Hope we'll have him again in the future. He does great content relating to American history, especially the American Civil War. He just did an awesome video, 2-part videos on the Battle of Honey Springs. Don't know what the Battle of Honey Springs is? Well, it was probably the largest and definitely the most important battle of the Civil War to occur in Indian Territory, we know today as Oklahoma. So that battle is very different from what we're used to when we talk about the American Civil War, but gives a new perspective on the conflict and just shows you how far-reaching the Civil War was. It wasn't just Lee and Grant fighting over Richmond. But we will actually be speaking about Lee and Grant again next week. We'll be returning to our live coverage of the Overland Campaign, as I kind of teased it last week, and I'll tease it again this week. Robert E. Lee has left the trenches of Spotsylvania. He's making a beeline for the North Anna River, where he is planning a trap for Ulysses S. Grant. We'll see if that works out. All right, guys. Here we are. We're at the end of the stream. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed. Before you depart, be sure to hit the like button down below. Let the algorithm know that you do want to see historical content. You do want to be edumacated through social media. So hit the like button down below to let them know. And this is the first time visiting. Welcome. Consider subscribing here to Readout Productions, where you'll be the first notified when videos come out like Retracing History, which there will be a new episode of Retracing History this Saturday, so keep your eyes peeled for it, and you'll be the first notified when we go live. We usually go live on Thursdays. We usually try to do Thursdays. I pick Thursdays. Shush. I'm trying to plug. Shush video. So I try to do Thursdays. I know it's kind of like I know it's a bit of an awkward day to do it. Some people have asked, well, why don't you do Friday or Saturday? Kind of just because Thursday is kind of my day where I don't have a lot going on. This is the evening where I can normally mellow out. Kind of gets me ready and hyped for the weekend. I typically work on weekends, so this kind of gets me hyped up to work the weekend. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in. I am going to play the video for real this time. We will see you next week at the North Anna River. Have a good night. Boys will really once again, shouting a battle cry of freedom. People really from the hillside, all together from the plain, shouting a battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. People reel around the flag, boys are really once again, shouting a battle cry of freedom.